Well, with just days until the first Republican debate, Governor Ron DeSantis' campaign is having to explain a strategy memo, a lengthy strategy memo, and documents from his super PAC. Now, sources tell CNN the memo has stirred confusion and anger from fundraisers and donors. It was first reported by the New York Times, the super PAC urging DeSantis at the debate to, quote, hammer Vivek Ramaswamy and defend Donald Trump in response to a Chris Christie attack.
So this memo also has, quote, a specific suggestion for an attack line accusing Mr. Christie of appealing mainly to Democrats. Quote, Trump is in here, so let's just leave him alone. He's too weak to defend himself here. I don't think we want to join forces with someone who, on this stage, who's auditioning for a show on MSNBC. So the DeSantis campaign responds to this whole thing and says this was not a campaign memo. We are not aware of it. We weren't aware of it prior to the article. With us now is Chris Christie, not in an audition for a show on MSNBC. We appreciate you being here, Governor. Would you like, you're in Miami, we'll get to why in a moment. Would you like to respond to this from DeSantis's PAC?
Well, first off, I'd like to respond to what the campaign said. It's not a campaign memo. There is no DeSantis campaign. The entire DeSantis campaign is being run by the Never Back Down super PAC. They've gotten all the people at the campaign fired that they didn't like, and now they're writing strategy memos and putting them on the internet where everybody can see them. Look, this just shows you it's not easy to run for president, everybody. And if you can't run for president in a way that doesn't create embarrassing process stories, multiple times a week, you certainly can't run the White House and run the federal government or be trusted to sit across from President Xi or Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un. And so, I think it's indication of something much, much bigger in terms of problems with Governor DeSantis. But I'll show up Wednesday night. We'll see how it goes.
All right, so let's talk about how it's going to go. You've called Trump a coward for probably not going. Maybe he's going to come. We'll see. What are you going to do on the debate stage if he's not there? Are you going to say that to Ron DeSantis? Are your attacks going to be against people like Tim Scott and others and DeSantis who have basically stood by Trump through all these indictments?
Poppy, I've got a very simple debate strategy. I'll listen to the questions, answer them directly and honestly, and if someone up there says something that I believe is dishonest, to call them out on it. That's it. I don't have any more complicated strategy than that. I don't, and I don't think you need one. I think what the American people want to see is, what's your plan for the future? Are you strong enough to be able to implement them? And are you, willing to put yourself in front of them and answer whatever questions come from two, I think, very good, credible interviewers, Bret Baier and Martha MacCallum. And I look forward to doing that. And I think all the people who are going through all these strategy memo stuff and coming up with canned lines and all the rest of it, I've watched that canned line thing. It doesn't work all that well.
Yeah, you pointed that out in a
Marco Rubio
2016
probably
debate,
recalls
if I
that.
recall correctly. I think I was covering your campaign at the time. To that point, though, you're not looking around and saying, that's my biggest problem in New Hampshire. That individual is the biggest hurdle I have to become the clear kind of contrast to Donald Trump here. You're not thinking through any of that. You're just going in and responding.
That's right, Phil. And by the way, my biggest problem and what I'm focused on is the biggest problem for the Republican Party for defeating Joe Biden, and that's Donald J. Trump. And, by the time we get to that stage Wednesday night, guys, he is more likely than not going to be out on bail in 4 different jurisdictions. I want everybody to think about that. Out on bail. I mean, the first question maybe should be from Bret Baier. Donald Trump, can you explain to us what the restrictions that were placed on you by all 4 different courts are as a condition of your release from custody? I mean, imagine that we have a front runner who has to answer those type of questions. I'm focused on that because I'm not focused on any one particular person except for the person who's ahead of me. And in New Hampshire, now that I've passed Donald Trump, or I passed rather Ron DeSantis, my next job is to pass Donald Trump in the polls there. So
were you surprised?
That's what I am focused on, Phil.
Right.
Is Donald Trump.
Were you surprised, given you know the former president and his penchant for either taking advice or not taking advice, that he canceled that Monday press conference he'd set up because of his lawyers?
No, I'm not surprised by it because what he now knows is he's facing jail time. And he can't make his situation much worse. and expect those lawyers to be able to do anything to help him. What he should have done, Phil, is listen to his lawyers back in the White House between November of 2020 and January 20th of 2021, when they told him, if you continue with this election interference activity, you are going to spend the rest of your life dealing with the criminal justice system. Bill Barr said that yesterday, that's what he was told, not only by Bill Barr, his attorney general, and other members of the Justice Department, but he was told that by his White House counsel as well, Pat Cipollone. He should have listened to those lawyers, and maybe he wouldn't be under indictment in 4 jurisdictions today, and he wouldn't be putting the country through this. He's not doing this for us. He is doing this because he can't help himself. And I think the first smart decision he's made in this regard in a long time was canceling that ridiculous press conference for Monday, where all of a sudden he was going to unveil evidence to us that he's apparently been hiding from the American people for nearly 3 years. I don't think so. I think it would have just been another, junior show of The Apprentice that we would have been watching on television.
Responding to the DeSantis campaign attack on you as auditioning for an MSNBC show, there's some interesting polling, though. I know you've seen it. Quinnipiac says 32% of Democrats have a favorable view of you versus 17% of Republicans, and you're the most favored Republican in another poll among Democratic voters. That's great for a general, but is it out of step with where the Republican primary electorate is?
Look, Poppy, I had no question about the fact that when you want to tell the truth about Donald Trump, that in the beginning, there are going to be some people who are going to react unfavorably to that. And I get that. But over time, what people are going to understand is I'm the only one who's telling the truth about Donald Trump. And what that shows you is, and they didn't break out the numbers among independents, which are even better for me than the numbers you showed. And that's what a Republican's going to have to do in order to win the presidency in November. Let me say this, Poppy, I'm about beating Joe Biden. I don't want Joe Biden and Kamala Harris back in office. I think they've been a disaster. And so we got to have someone who can beat him. And Donald Trump cannot beat him. I'm the person, by the way, when I ran for re-election in New Jersey, I won with 61% of the vote in one of the bluest states in America, and did so by winning 51% of the Hispanic vote, 29% of the African-American vote, and over 70% of the independent vote. And that's the kind of formula you're going to need for the Republican Party to go back to winning a majority of the popular vote and the electoral vote in November of 2024. And that's what those numbers tell me.
You make a good point, though, in the sense of what I'm interested in exploring here. You mentioned Bill Barr earlier and just how sharply he's turned against the former president because of what's transpired. And you mentioned that it was going to be hard early in a Republican primary, given how people view Trump with Republicans. Bill Barr, even yesterday, saying would not commit to not voting for the former president again. I want you to listen to this.
I've already explained that if I thought that one of two people is going to end up as the president, then I wouldn't throw my vote away. I would try to make a decision who would do the least damage to the country. But if there were other options, I would also consider.
Would you just not vote for president? Vote on
no, I think
down ticket?
No, if one of two people is going to do it, I would have to make that bitter choice. But and if there are other options.
But it's conceivable Bill Barr could vote for Donald Trump.
Well, I'm not, as I said, I'd jump off that bridge when I get to it.
Beyond the fact that, other than you, I'm not sure anybody else that high level of a Republican official has been so visceral in their criticism and colorful to some degree of the former president. Isn't that the problem? That you have Republicans who say explicitly, he's terrible for the country, he should never be president again. And then they get asked, will you vote for him again, and won't commit one way or another. If you can't kind of break through that, that's a problem for candidates like yourself, isn't it?
I don't think so, Phil, because listen, I think Bill Barr made it very clear he's not supporting Donald Trump in the Republican primary for president.
But he's one of those that should be the
way,
easiest to get to say explicitly. Like, you have to get people to say, I'm not going to vote for him, period, in order to shift the primary electorate to some degree.
No, Phil. Step one is to get them to vote for you in the primary. That's step one. And Bill Barr just made it very clear that he's not voting for Donald Trump in the primary, and that he expects someone else to be the nominee. And he's right, because I'm going to be the nominee. And if I had a guess, I bet you Bill Barr's going to vote for me But he'll have to answer that question himself at some point when he goes into a voting booth. But in the end, what I'd say to you is that job one is to get Republicans to come to the same conclusion Bill Barr has come to, which is Donald Trump is bad for the party because he can't beat Joe Biden, and he's bad for the country because of the things that he has done both while he was president and most particularly in the post-presidency period. And so, I'm not worried about the general election at the moment and what people I can persuade to vote for me then. I'm going to get them to vote for me now, Phil, so we never have to confront that bridge that Bill Barr said he was prepared to jump off. I'm going to give him a break. We're not going to have that bridge. I'll be the candidate for president, and then he won't have to worry about jumping off any bridge. Too bright a legal mind to have him commit suicide.